this thing that was so basic and ordinary reveals the truth of God.
When we begin to live lives that are so tightly under our control, we're miserable because we're supposed to live in this romance, this adventure of our place of order meeting a little bit of chaos, meeting that place where our ability ends and God's providence, His world that He's in control of, begins. And it's that clash that's where we discover God if we're paying attention. Welcome back to Elevate Ordinary, great conversations about the ordinary pursuit of truth, goodness, and beauty. I'm JonMarc Grodi.
And I'm Teresa Grodi, his lovely wife, if you're not watching via video right now. Yes,
that was scripted. That was in there. Yeah, lovely wife. Good. I had to put it in the script, otherwise she wouldn't say it. We thank you for joining us again. We hope you enjoyed our last conversation about conversations. We started on quite a meta note. So this week, our topic is rightly considered. That's what it says there on the thing behind us. And that derives from one of my favorite quotes, another G.K. Chesterton quote, one of my favorites, in which he says, "Adventure is an inconvenience rightly considered." And the flip side being true too, I think, in his original quote, that an inconvenience is an adventure rightly considered. What he's getting at there is that the ordinary things in life, again, given the focus of our show, the ordinary things, the apparently ordinary things, rightly considered, are the stuff of which saints and adventures and heroes and epics are made out of. And that's what we want to talk about. That's what we want to talk about generally in the show, but specifically today, we want to drill down into what is that what is the ordinary that we're speaking of? What are we, and what happens when we rightly consider that?
I want to start off by giving a little conversion testimony, because I've always been a dream big person. I mean, from as little as I can remember, I was either going to be the actress to win the most amount of Oscars, or I was going to become president of the United States. There was never any middle ground for me. There was never any second place for me. I have just always been a really driven person.
I'm still holding out for that second one. President.
What is it?
White House.
No, thanks. No. Anyway, so I'd always wanted to go big places. And then when I had my Christian conversion, I was raised Catholic, but didn't really understand what that meant. I had my Christian conversion when I was 21, and it just went from secular Teresa wanting to do big things and be big things to Christian Teresa, who now wanted to be like the best apologist on EWTN, touring all over, people being slain in the spirit. And I don't even know what that means. But I still, I went from wanting one big thing to wanting another big thing. And it wasn't until I was exposed to theology of the body, John Paul II's teaching on human sexuality and the family, that I saw this thing, the very creation of my own body, in the image and likeness of God. This thing that was so basic and ordinary. Yeah. My body, everybody else's body, reveals the truth of God. Mm. It really flipped my life. It changed the paradigm with which I viewed my life. Mm. I no longer saw my life's meaning as out there somewhere, something big that I was going to make for myself, and I just have to get there. I started seeing my body, my daily, the way I went about my life, as something that had great value, and could have a huge impact on the world just by how I live my life, my own life, the way I pick up my coffee cup, babe. Mm-hmm. Like, am I so distracted and angry and whatever that, I'm not thinking what I'm doing, or am I carrying myself with dignity? When we got married and we vowed that our marriage, the two of us, would become our big thing, that was a big deal for me. Because it no longer meant this ideal, this I'm coming towards marriage and someday we'll be married and we'll be in the sacrament of marriage and it will happen. It was, now I'm in it and I have to put my money where my mouth is. I have to really believe that this thing I just vowed to be my life's vocation, my biggest thing, is actually my biggest thing. I have to act as if God exists and that he's faithful. And for me, we went from, a college town where we were, doing exciting things and we had leadership roles, and we went into rural Ohio, literally in the middle of a cornfield. I had no car to get me to and fro. We didn't have any money. We were living on one income. And I had to sit and think about how I was going to be faithful to what I professed was my big thing, my marriage and then my children. I think it's the same for men. This is, again, there's lots of kind of give and take and back and forth in the story of our relationship, how we kind of thought through these things. But, the same for husbands, for fathers too. I recognize this in myself, and then I started seeing it in people around me too. It's very easy intellectually as a Catholic to get married and to believe that this is a second to my vocation to love and serve God, that my vocation to marriage is a first thing, is an important thing, is a big thing, but that it's very easy to get married and for it then just to be something that I'm managing, I'm putting up with, I'm doing. It's there, but I'm still, my heart is kind of, I'm still thinking in terms of business or a company or work out there, doing something big that's going to give my life meaning. And it's interesting in both examples, it's there's not really a trust in God there. There's not really a belief that if I'm simply faithful to what God has given me, that he'll do great things. I've often said, when we look to the saints, it's very easy to look at the saints in the church, and they're there for a reason. We have their examples, but it's easy to look at them and to just look at the big things that they've done. And to get caught up in the big things and caught up in seeing those big things as what is the defining difference between them and me. They did these big things. And so I got to set out to do big things with my life, if I want to pursue that vocation. But what does our Lord tell us? If you're not faithful in the little things, you're not going to be faithful in the big things. Right. Yeah. And that thought from the gospel was something that really pierced my heart. Yeah. It wasn't so much that I was giving up my dreams or I was giving up things outside the household, or I was throwing it all into the children. I needed to be faithful in the little things, trusting that when I was faithful in the little things, God is not going to leave me idle. And for us, it really did work out that way. I became a joyful mother. I mean, once you have your first child and you see this little best friend that you've created, it's hard not to want more children, so children came and children came and children came, and I'd finished my upper level degree in history, and I had always dreamed of being a tour guide or a pilgrimage leader once I had my conversion. And we worked really hard on ordering our life so that our family came first. You and I both did. And as it turned out, 4 years down the road, I was approached by someone who felt a decade prior that she was called to work with me as a pilgrimage leader. Which is what one of your dreams had been. Yeah. And there was a sense in which you kind of gave that up, in the sense that you really said, Lord, what do you want of me? And you really embraced what he had put in your life. And then you turn around and it actually was put back into your lap. Yeah. And I think that women do better at this. We do better at this because our life tends to turn inward when we get married and have children, because we have the children. And then we are naturally and biologically, we tend to take care of them. Our life naturally begins revolving around the family. But sometimes I think that it's more difficult for men, and they do need to hear kind of the testimonies of men who are faithful to their vocation and put their family first. And we kind of struggled with this because after our second child, I had postpartum depression, and we were living 4 hours away from one set of grandparents, 2 hours away from another set of grandparents, in a town that there was just no help available to us for babysitting. And we had moved to that town for you to get your master's degree in philosophy. And at that point in our marriage, you had a dream of becoming like a speaker or like a host or something, where you were a writer. And this was kind of the dream that we had moved there for you to pursue. And what ended up happening was that you were seeing your wife just dying. I was going crazy. I was spiraling downward. And so I kept saying, I wish we were back home. I wish I could be with my mom. Like it's so easy when there's babysitting just right here. And I feel like I can take a breath, and at the time I didn't realize it was postpartum depression. But you did was you really elevated our marriage to the place it was supposed to be. And you said, you know what, I'm going to put aside my master's for the moment, and we are going to move you back home. And you did that for my health, for my benefit, as the mother of your wife, your bride, and then as the mother of your children, who's, taking care of your children. You put my health first. And I'm so grateful. And it really did set into motion this explosion of grace in our lives. I really mark the time that we came back to Northwest Ohio as this time when God just poured his grace into our lives and into our community. And I know it wouldn't have gone, I know that wouldn't have been possible if you hadn't made that death to self, which is what all Christian men are called to do for their families. We hear that verse, wives, submit to your husbands, but what are you submitting to? You're submitting to his mission, and his mission is to get on the cross and treat his bride the same way that Christ did for the church, and Christ died for the church. And if I would characterize your fatherhood, your husbandhood,
husbandry, no, that's keeping animals. No, whatever, we got it.
It would be you are someone who is striving to fulfill that role of death for the sake of your family, and I'm so grateful for that.
Well, yeah. Well, striving is the salient, again, the important word here, because I'm not perfect at it. But yeah, another quote comes to mind, Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher: purity of heart is to will one thing. In other words, purity, which is a word that in modern times comes with a lot of kind of silly baggage. Purity means your heart is undivided, right? It knows... You know what you're about. You know what the priorities are, and you want them. My dreams were all vague, but it's kind of like what you were describing earlier. The real attachment in my heart was that what I have is not enough. That was the attachment. So it wouldn't matter what I got. It wouldn't matter which dreams I pursued. It's always like, is this it? I want more. It's got to be something more exciting than this, because you can get in this state. It's probably connected to, acedia or sloth, and we'll have other episodes about virtues and vices coming, because that's a big topic for us. But this state of never being present to who you are and who you're with and what God is calling to you, always living with a divided heart. A part of my heart is here with you, but the other part of my heart is anxious and worried and thinking about how can I get a little bit more out of this? Where can I be? What can I be accomplishing? What can I be doing more of, so that I'm not stuck with my life, the life that God's given me?
The next episode needs to be on sloth. If you want that, please let us know.
Yeah, definitely. There's so many good quotes connected to this. One of my a few of our favorites here. So maybe you've heard this one by C.S. Lewis. He says this, and I can't remember the source here, but he says, quote, "The great thing, if one can, is to stop regarding all the unpleasant things as interruptions of one's own or real life. The truth is, of course, that what one calls the interruptions are precisely one's real life, the life God is sending one day by day, unquote.
That's very Saint Therese of the Little Flower.
Yeah, and I got her on here too. She's coming right up. I love that. Real life, what we call our real life sometimes is a fantasy world, Sometimes our vague dreams that consist solely in just not wanting to be who I am and where I am and embrace that constant background noise, that constant flight of fantasy, that's a fantasy world, but we call it my real life. And in the meantime, the interruptions, the ordinary things. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. The ordinary things, the ordinary stuff of life.
Yeah.
That's real life. That's what God is sending you. And we're squandering those opportunities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've been very blessed to have been on many pilgrimages to many very holy sites and participate in large worship sessions, and hear phenomenal speakers. But I have to say that the majority of the mysticism that occurs in my prayer life occurs around very ordinary events. Like I remember one time we had been given some stuff from someone's garden, some vegetables from someone's garden. And I had been able in my pitiful, pitiful garden to pick like several green beans and a few carrots or something like that. And as I was cooking up this meal, we had gotten our butter locally. And as I was like sauteing these vegetables, I realized like this thought came from outside of myself, this impression that just none of this stuff came from a store. This was all grown by my neighbors, and it was brought to me. And I was crying. I was crying while I was cooking these vegetables because I'm just like, this is real. This is real. And I'm into gardening. And the more that I garden, honestly, the more I understand the scriptures. Yeah. Especially, to work the land, to have your ups and downs, but then also to save seeds. I've just started saving seeds, and I'm getting more the importance that Jesus placed on crops and failures of crops and storing up things, it was all just stuff like when all of my vegetables and food came from a grocery store, I didn't get any of that stuff. And it wasn't until I started having a garden that I began to understand our Lord. Right. In a way that I never had before. And the first time we bought a house, what is that G.K. Chesterton quote talking about the art of the common man?
Property is the art of democracy.
Property is the art of democracy.
G.K. Chesterton's What is Wrong with the World?
Oh, that's the best book. We need to do a podcast on the books that have, the books that have greatly influenced us. But when we first bought a house, we had kind of been squatting in a couple houses, and then we had an apartment, which was lovely. But when we first bought a house, I remember being frenzied about the fact that we didn't have a mudroom. And I was just like, we have to pick the absolute perfect hook to go on the wall, because if we make one thing on the wall, we'll have to cover it someday. And it just occurred to me in that moment, no, this is my house. I never have to leave. The rose bush that I'm deciding to put into the ground I could walk through that garden and admire that rose bush in 80 years. Like all of a sudden my house, which before I had considered an inconvenience when we had been squatting, like, don't put holes in the walls, don't let the kids touch this, don't do this. Everything was, just keep it as pristine as you possibly can. But when we had our own property, it truly became my art form. Yeah. I love every little square inch of my house, even the parts that are inconvenient, because it's mine. It's mine to put my stamp on. I love my garden. I love my yard. I dream of all these beautiful ways that it can grow. I even love the weeds, babe. When we blacktopped our driveway, I was so sad that those little purslane weeds were not coming up in between.
Don't worry, they're all back.
They came
every
right
one
back.
of them.
Our neighbors came over and were like, it looks so good, guys. Like, please keep it this way.
Sorry.
And the first weed came back up and I was like, oh, thank God, life. Like Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park where he's like, life finds a way. And I think of that all the time whenever I see weeds, but they're my weeds and they're in my yard and I love them.
Yeah.
And geez, I was the person who would have gotten out the weed spray and killed them all because I wanted the perfect yard.
Yeah.
But now that it's mine, it's precious.
Right.
And everything that bursts forth on my property is beautiful and incredible, and truly a way that I encounter God, because he's the creative one. And this is my way of connecting with his creativity.
Jean-Pierre de Caussade, author of Abandonment to Divine Providence, wrote, quote, "There is not a moment in which God does not present himself under the cover of some pain to be endured, of some consolation to be enjoyed, or of some duty to be performed. All that takes place within us, around us, or through us contains and conceals his divine action." So you find God in the ordinary. You find God in those things around you. All the description you just made of the home and the garden and nature. One of the things for human beings is that we're supposed to come up against something impalpable, something that's beyond us, something we can't control. When we begin to live lives that are so tightly under our control, we're miserable, because we're supposed to live in this romance, this adventure of our place of order meeting a little bit of chaos, meeting that place where our ability ends and God's providence, his world that he's in control of, begins. And it's that clash that's where we discover God, if we're paying attention. Another quote here. So this is Saint Jose Maria Escrivá. He says, quote, "There is something holy, something divine hidden in the most ordinary situations, and it is up to each one of you to discover it. There is no other way, my daughters and sons. Either we learn to find our Lord in ordinary everyday life, or we shall never find him." Either we learn to find God in the ordinary, or we'll never find him. Sincerely, if we let that restlessness, that slothful restlessness, take root in our soul, we could, in some sense, spend our whole life looking for God out there, being restless where he's put us, ignoring the things he's giving us, and always wishing we were out there finding him somewhere. He is here in the ordinary things.
That is one of the things that just hurts my heart the most.
Yeah.
When I realized, because I have a great family. I love my family. My family is very self-sacrificial. We are very riddled with faults, and we are struggling. We are Eastern European, loud and angry, and but very generous. Salt of the earth, right?
That's right.
But one of the things that hurt my heart when I realized it was that I had ignored my family, because my culture had told me that everything was out there. My life began out there with my friends, out there at school, out there when I accomplished my degree, out there when I was in my career. And I spent years, barely knowing my siblings, creating a, a resume, but I barely know my siblings now, and that hurts me a lot.
But we're trying,
Yeah.
There's always time. There's always time. Well, there's always time. There's always the now.
There's always
with which
the
to begin
now.
praying for people and reaching out and, building those, finding God in the ordinary again. There's always the now.
One of the things that we do in homeschooling is I really like Charlotte Mason, who worked for, or Chesterton's wife worked for her. So there was a little bit of overlap, possibly. Maybe she was influenced by G.K. Chesterton, or cross-pollination.
Use another gardening.
There you go. So we use the Charlotte Mason ideas for the little kids. And one of the reasons why I like Charlotte Mason is because I want to guard in our children their curiosity for as long as I possibly can. I remember the day when probably our 5-year-old, our eldest, is just smart as a whip. One of those, I guess, as Peppa Pig would call it, a clever clogs. He just takes in information, and he knows everything, and he's got it. I've got it, Mom. I know what I'm doing. I remember he must have been about 5, and I was like, wow, guys, look up at the clouds. They are just so beautiful. And then he was like, Mom, they're just particles of water that are floating. And he like rattled off the scientific term, and my heart broke because I was like, he's got that cloud in his back pocket, and that is how he's going to see it until the world breaks him at some point and he realizes he does not get it.
Yeah. Luckily for him, he's in a big family, so
yeah,
every day is a little bit of brokenness.
But curiosity, when you lose your curiosity, and you become a radical. You know, we always used to talk when we were in college about radical atheists and radical fundamentalist Christians are the same, because they both have truth in their back pocket. They've got it all wrapped up. They've got it all figured out, and curiosity is gone. You know, there's no more wonder. It's all in their back pocket, you know? And so one of the ways that you can elevate the ordinary is just to be curious. You know, like our Lord says, unless you're like a child.
Yeah, well, you know, it reminds me of a quote we were talking about last episode about conversation. You know, always expect the other person that you're talking to has something to teach you. And that's a great attitude to keep in mind for conversation. Well, the world, you know, nature, sometimes called God's other book, you know, God is always speaking to us through the world. So again, if we apply that same notion to the world, we should come at every day, every moment, everything in the world, everything in nature, expecting that there's something that's still there to learn. I love Dr. Peter Kreeft. He likes to call it the Hamlet principle. You know, so in Hamlet, he says to Horatio, there's more in heaven and earth, Horatio, than you've dreamt of in all your philosophy. The modern world tends to come at things reductionistically. You know, so everything is only just something less. Reason is actually just rationalization. Love is really just lust. This table is really just atoms. It's really just its constituent parts. Rather than the other way of looking at things, everything is more than it seems. This is a table, but it's more than it seems. You are a collection of atoms, but you're more than you seem. There's always more to learn. There's always a greater, bigger picture that we may be just getting a glimpse of, you know, but it's there, but we have to be curious. That's curiosity is always that expectation of moreness rather than there always being less. Yeah.
You know, you've found a good scientist when they understand that.
Yeah.
You know, when they don't have this white-knuckled approach to their truth that they've figured out and they've worked so long on, but that recognizing that whatever truth they've just figured out there in any moment could be just dashed to pieces.
I think C.S. Lewis says somewhere that God is the great iconoclast.
Oh.
You know, that in our knowledge of him, we come to know God, we go to him in prayer, we read the scriptures, we learn about our faith. But part of the humility of even our knowledge of our faith consists of always being ready for that present static understanding to be dashed to pieces. And being okay when that happens, because as soon as you know, our picture of who God is crystallizes and we got it, we got him figured out, we got him in our back pocket, we got to be ready for God to come in and say, okay, now you're ready for something deeper. And then something happens and it breaks that, and we have to kind of reformulate. We have to approach God again. Who are you really? Well, that's true of all of our human knowledge. You know, again, as soon as our knowledge crystallizes and we begin to be sure, I understand this person I've married, I understand these kids, I understand what married life is about, I understand what the faith is about, I understand the scientific concept, and our wonder is killed. I mean, there's two directions we can go. We can either continue to die, you grow more and more crystallized, more and more petrified in our self-satisfied knowledge, or we can turn and be curious. We can turn to the thing, you know, the flower or the table or the relationship, and be still and be silent and enter back into it and expect there to be more. And there always is if we have eyes to see it, but it's an attitude, you know?
It's really important to remember that our Lord says that he is truth. He is the way, the truth, and the life. So we should never be afraid to ask questions, never be afraid to ask any question. You know, any doubt that creeps into our mind, we should be able to ask that of the Church of God and expect an answer.
Right. So, I mean, we've gone a bunch of different places with this, but, you know, back to where we started, an adventure is an inconvenience rightly considered. So the ordinary things, the apparent even inconveniences of our life, the apparently little things, these are all the places God comes to meet us. And if we rightly consider them, if we approach them with the right attitude, they're the stuff of our adventure, the adventure God's calling us to, the adventure he's given us. And so that curiosity, that right consideration, that elevation of the ordinary is part of embracing that adventure, And so I guess just to wrap up this particular conversation, maybe just some practical ideas for how we embrace the ordinary and see the adventure. Our show, all the conversations going forward are going to be about different aspects of this, different aspects of the ordinary, different aspects of everyday life that we can consider and sort of be curious about and dig out some of the deep truth or goodness or beauty in the ordinary things. But for now, how do we begin to elevate and appreciate the ordinary? I'd say the first thing, as we were talking about last time, is to bring those things out and to discuss them, have a good conversation about them. And that can be with the Lord in prayer, and that can be with your spouse or with other people in your life. Take those things, take those everyday things, our parenting, our interactions, our money, our time, bring them into the light of eternity, of why we're here, what our purpose is for, and have a good conversation about them. See what another person thinks about them, ask their opinion, get their feelings and impressions, and have a good conversation about those things. That would be one suggestion here. I'd say another one, really practical suggestion. We both have lately really gotten into our journals. And a great way to begin to embrace the ordinary more is to begin the day by turning to the stuff of your life and being curious about it. A great way to do that is to write down a few things in the morning that you're grateful for. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, to perform an exam and look back and say, what happened today? What were some of the amazing things that happened today? Some of the blessings, some of the unexpected ways that God touched you. What were some of the ways in which I didn't live up to the adventure that God sent me today? What are some of the things I could have done differently, better? Those little bookends only take a few minutes at the beginning and end of the day, but they're really powerful.
I think that Hamlet principle, always keeping that in your mind, there's more than what I'm just seeing here. There's more than, can you say it again?
Yeah. There's more in heaven and earth, Horatio, than you've dreamt of in all your philosophy. Nope, I got it wrong too, but whatever. The point stands.
And I think also stand in awe of the fact that you're 20 some years old and that the world has gone on for a lot longer than you have. Stand in awe of that oak tree that you come across that has got to be over 100, 200 years old. Stand in awe. Practice awe. We don't encounter that a whole lot anymore, unless I think you get out in nature or work with really intense machines or science. Like we don't, or have children. Stand in awe of your children. Stand in awe of their little intellect. Practice that. Yeah. Lay down on the ground and look at those crystallizations of liquid floating in the air.
Snow.
Wait, what? Clouds.
Oh, those ones.
I need my kid to tell me what the definition of clouds, the scientific definition of clouds is.
Yeah. I'd say another one is, elevate those parts of your life in prayer and just examine, do I really believe, again, some of the simple concepts that were in some of those great saint quotes. Do I really believe God is in the ordinary? Do I really believe God is in control, that he's the author of the story that I'm in? Because if so, then truly, how can the things around me, the apparent interruptions, the small things, the ordinary things of life, how can those not be in his hands? Those not be things he is sending or allowing for a purpose? And so if I don't really believe that, not just intellectually, but in my heart, if I don't really believe that, I need to examine that and perhaps ask for that faith. Lord, I think I believe that, but I don't feel it. I don't have that trust in my heart.
Help my unbelief.
I believe, help my unbelief.
And honor your vocation.
Yeah.
Honor your vocation. Practice putting your marriage first. Practice that.
Yeah. Put first
because
things first.
Nowadays we don't ever anymore marry our enemies. We're not suffering from arranged marriages. We marry our friends, and there's a purpose why we fell in love and why we thought they'd be good life partners. So maybe practice standing shoulder to shoulder again. You know, if you need to have a good fight to appreciate the other person, have a good fight, but have it with the intention that you're going to stand shoulder to shoulder and go forward like you vowed you would.
That marriage that God's given you is worth fighting for. Yeah. Another one, and this is another way of putting first things first, is sometimes the ability to be curious, the ability to be quiet, to be present is something we're very unpracticed in, even when we really want it, even when we very sincerely are trying for it. And so how do we practice that? So there's lots of things we can do. I think one of them that also perhaps begins to redress an area of justice that we're not faithful in is, how do we practice the Sabbath? I mean, think about it. From the beginning of time, God knows that we're going to be busy, anxious, sort of driven people. And he says, that's all well and good. One day a week, you're going to put that all aside and just be with me, be in good conversation. Maybe go read some good books, maybe make some art, maybe go for a walk in the woods with the kids, but you're to put aside the work.
Sunday is the hardest day too, because the work week ends on Friday. And so on Saturday, you spend a lot of time just being exhausted and you're tired and you kind of lay around. But then when Sunday comes around, you have all this energy and you're like, I'm going to do all the things. We're going to work on everything. We're going to get our grocery shopping done. And it does take a lot of restraint to be like, oh my gosh, I'm just going to sit and read a book or play the game with the kids that they want to play. I hate this. I wish I were doing something productive. It's hard, and it's a real sacrifice to try to honor the Sabbath. Yeah.
But it's a sacrifice worth making, because the lessons that we can learn when we begin to embrace the Sabbath, the lessons of leisure, of true contemplation, really being in God's presence, being in other people's presence, being present to what God's sending to us. The goal isn't for that just to remain on Sunday, but that begins to invade our whole week, all of our ordinary time throughout the week, that even when we go back to work, back to our tasks, back to the busyness, that hopefully we're more present to the people there, to the good gifts and the work that God's given us, and also to his presence, his divine action and presence in all those ordinary things. You know, it's there, but we have to practice to be able to see it and embrace it. One other just practical thing, and this, I'm just going to mention it, but it's a preview of things to come. A really important topic for us are the church's kind of long lost treasure of an understanding of virtue and vice, an authentic understanding of the virtues, particularly the cardinal virtues, I think is key to beginning to elevate the ordinary. You know, to be able to look at the ordinary stuff of life, all the ordinary stuff, our school, our finances, our time, all the inconveniences, all the day-to-day routines, all that stuff. The virtues give us the framework, they give us the concepts with which to analyze those ordinary things of our life and begin to dig in and really embrace them, really use them, because it's all raw material. All the stuff that is in our life is stuff that God has given us with which to grow in trust, to grow in prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance, to grow in trust in his providence, love for the Creator that's given us all this, love for the people around us. It's all the material, but we have to embrace that ordinariness. So again,
I can't wait for you guys to hear our podcast on patience, because let me tell you, I was doing it wrong. When you hear the church, don't give it away. Don't give it away. They have to look up our podcast on patience in the future. Yes. But patience and sloth, I'm really excited to get into that.
Yeah, patience, sloth, prudence. There's going to be a lot of neat. That occasionally in the future we'll do podcasts, shows on different on virtues, and
on Jane Austen.
That's simply a preview. But the point is, there's some practical ideas for beginning to embrace the ordinary, to elevate the ordinary, to embrace the adventure which consists in the right consideration of the ordinary things of life. So thank you again for joining us for Elevate Ordinary. I'm JonMarc Grodi and my wife Teresa. Hope you'll join us again soon. God bless.
Thanks for watching this episode of Elevate Ordinary.
If you're watching the show on YouTube, make sure to press the like button, subscribe to the AWAKEN Catholic YouTube channel, and turn on bell notifications so that you can find out when new episodes are released.
Also, it's super helpful if you can leave a review for the podcast on iTunes.
At AWAKEN Catholic, we're dedicated to bringing people to truth through beauty. This show and all of the shows here on AWAKEN Catholic are only possible because of people like you.
You can become a part of what makes this all possible by making a tax-deductible donation for as little as the price of a cup of coffee a week.
To join the Awaken Nation, visit awakencatholic.org/join.